In a world where the noise of everyday life drowns out the voices of those who are struggling, it's easy to overlook the invisible. The homeless, the forgotten, the ones with nothing but the clothes on their back and their stories held close to their hearts. But sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, an act of kindness can remind us all of what really matters. This is Emily. She's one of the many people who have found themselves with little more than a street beneath their feet. But what happens next will show us that, even in the face of the harshest circumstances, kindness can still exist when we least expect it. Emily's story isn't just about survival. It's about something much more profound, something that goes beyond the need for food or shelter. It's about a moment, a small moment, that would change everything. It's about how sometimes what we choose to give is the very thing that brings us back to life. With nothing left to give, Emily made a choice that would change the course of the day, a choice that would start a ripple, touching the hearts of those who would witness it, and eventually changing her own life forever. Emily sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, her hands clutching the last piece of bread she had left. The bread, once soft and fresh, was now dry and crumbled, barely enough to feed her. As she took a small bite, her eyes wandered down the street, watching people pass her by, their lives moving fast and unaware of her quiet presence. In the distance, a stray dog appeared, its thin frame moving hesitantly toward her. Its fur was matted and dirty, its ribs visible beneath its coat. The dog stopped a few feet away, looking up at her with wide, pleading eyes. For a moment, Emily didn't move. She stared back at the dog, her heart sinking as she saw the same hunger in its eyes that she felt every day. Her hand trembled slightly as she looked down at the bread in her lap, the last of what she had to eat. The city bustled around her, and yet, in this small moment, the world seemed to slow down. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. Would she keep this bread for herself, or would she share it with the dog? Without a word, Emily broke off a small piece of the bread and slowly extended it toward the dog. It hesitated at first, sniffing the air, before gingerly stepping forward. As the dog took the bread from her hand, Emily smiled faintly, watching as it devoured the small offering. The warmth that spread through her chest was unexpected, almost as if the act of giving, no matter how small, had lifted something heavy inside her. The dog finished the bread and looked up at her with a look of pure gratitude. It didn't bark or jump around, just sat there, wagging its tail slowly, as if understanding that this moment, this simple act, meant something more than either of them could express. Emily reached out to gently pet the dog's head, feeling a rare sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't much, just a piece of bread, but in that brief exchange, something between them shifted. And though Emily still had nothing, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone. As Emily sat there with the dog by her side, something remarkable started to happen. A passerby, a middle-aged woman, noticed the scene. Her eyes lingered on Emily and the dog for a moment before she stopped and walked closer. The woman knelt down beside Emily, her voice gentle as she spoke. "You're hungry, aren't you?" she asked, glancing at the breadcrumbs left in Emily's hand. Emily looked up, startled, unsure of what to say. She didn't expect anyone to stop, let alone speak to her. She nodded quietly, her gaze lowering again, unable to meet the woman's eyes. But the woman wasn't looking away. She smiled softly and then reached into her bag. "Here," she said, pulling out a sandwich and handing it to Emily. "You need this more than I do." The woman then placed a few bills in Emily's hand, her warmth tangible in the cool air. At first, Emily didn't know how to react. She was used to the cold indifference of the city, the way people walked by, too busy to notice the people like her who were struggling. But here was someone, a stranger, offering not just food, but a moment of genuine kindness. She looked up at the woman, her eyes brimming with tears she hadn't expected to fall. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. The woman gave her a reassuring smile. "Take care of yourself," she said, before turning to leave, but not before offering one last look at the dog. The woman bent down to scratch its ears, a silent promise of compassion before walking off into the crowd. Emily watched her go, the sandwich in her hand forgotten for a moment. She felt a surge of emotions, surprise, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of connection that she hadn't felt in a long time. As she sat there, still processing what had just happened, another person walked by. This time, it was a man, older, with a kind face. He paused as he saw Emily, then glanced at the dog, who was now wagging its tail at him. Without a word, the man stopped, knelt down beside Emily, and placed a thermos of hot coffee next to her. "For you," he said with a warm smile, before slipping a few more bills into her hand. "Stay safe," he added, his tone genuine. Emily felt her heart swell as the man walked away, disappearing into the crowd. It wasn't just the money or the coffee. What truly moved her was the unexpected kindness of strangers who saw her, not as invisible, but as a person worthy of care and compassion. As she sat there with the dog, her heart a little lighter, Emily realized that sometimes it takes only a small act of kindness to remind us that humanity is still alive, even in the busiest, most indifferent places. As Emily continued to sit on the sidewalk, her world had begun to shift in ways she never expected. The kindness of strangers had sparked something bigger than she could have imagined. People were beginning to notice her, to see her not as invisible, but as someone deserving of compassion. One by one, others stopped to offer help. A young woman came by with a warm blanket, draping it over Emily's shoulders with a soft smile. "I thought you might need this," she said, her voice full of kindness. The woman didn't stay long, just a quick gesture of generosity before she moved on, but her presence lingered in Emily's heart. Not long after, another man stopped by. This time, he had a cup of soup in his hands, offering it to Emily with a kind word. "I don't have much, but I thought you could use something warm." He sat with her for a few moments, sharing quiet conversation, before heading off, leaving behind a sense of warmth, not just from the soup, but from the kindness he'd shown. As the day went on, more people stopped to help, some offering food, others giving small amounts of money. Emily had never experienced anything like it. She had always been used to the cold indifference of the world, to the way people would avert their eyes and walk past, as if she were invisible. But now, one small act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, and suddenly, she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't just the homeless girl sitting on the street. She was a person, someone worthy of care, attention, and respect. And then, as the sun began to set, casting a soft golden light over the street, Emily looked down at the dog beside her. It was no longer the thin, hungry creature that had approached her earlier. The dog had filled out, its coat was shinier, and its eyes sparkled with the same gratitude that Emily now felt. She smiled at the dog, feeling a deep sense of connection. She wasn't sure where it would go from here, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't just the food, the blanket, or the small gestures that had changed things for her. It was the simple fact that people had seen her. They had shown her kindness, and in return, they had reminded her that no matter how tough things got, there was still love and humanity in the world. As she sat there with the dog, Emily felt something shift inside her, something that could only be described as a quiet, powerful feeling of being seen, of being valued. It was the beginning of something new, something that would change the course of her life forever. A few weeks passed, and Emily's life began to change in ways she never thought possible. The ripple of kindness that started with a small piece of bread had created a chain reaction, one that would not only transform her, but also those around her. The people who had offered her help and support continued to check in on her, ensuring that she had what she needed. One day, a social worker named Sarah, who had heard about Emily's situation, approached her with an offer that would forever alter the course of her life. "I've been talking to a few people," Sarah said gently, handing Emily a brochure for a local housing program. "We've got a place for you. If you're ready, we can help you get settled in. It's a fresh start, Emily. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Emily took the brochure, her hands trembling slightly as she read over the information. A place to stay. A chance for something more than just surviving day to day. She had never imagined it could be possible for someone like her. But here it was, a real opportunity, offered without judgment or hesitation. It wasn't easy at first. Moving into the apartment was a huge step, and it came with its own set of challenges. There were things Emily had to adjust to, living with more than just the bare minimum, learning how to trust again, and finding her way in a world that had once seemed so cold and indifferent. But with the help of Sarah and others who had supported her along the way, Emily began to rebuild. She started taking small steps forward, attending workshops, learning new skills, and reconnecting with the world around her. The dog, now healthy and happy, was still by her side, a constant companion through it all. Emily found a job at a local cafe where she was welcomed with open arms, a place where she was valued, not pitted. Slowly but surely, the girl who once sat on a cold sidewalk, holding her last piece of bread, was beginning to find her footing again. And as Emily stood in front of her new apartment, looking at the small but cozy space that she could finally call her own, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had come a long way from the girl who once felt invisible, and she knew that none of it would have been possible without the kindness of those who saw her, the strangers who stopped to help, and the moments that reminded her that she was worthy of love and care. Emily wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and with each passing day, her future seemed a little brighter. The journey wasn't over, but it had taken a beautiful turn, one that had shown her that the world was full of good people, and that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Emily's life continued to transform. The once cold and empty street she had called home now seemed like a distant memory, a reminder of how far she had come. Her new apartment, though small, was a sanctuary. It was a place where she could finally rest, where she could start to heal and rebuild her life. The dog, who had become her constant companion, was thriving in ways Emily never thought possible. Its coat was thick and healthy, its energy was full of life, and the bond between them had only deepened. They had both been through so much, and now, together, they were starting a new chapter. One afternoon, Emily sat in the park with the dog, watching children play and people laugh. She was no longer an outsider looking in. She was part of the world again. The sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over everything, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt at peace. As she looked at the dog, a wave of emotion washed over her. She remembered the day she had given the last of her bread to that hungry animal. How in that moment, she had thought she had nothing left to give. But that small act of kindness had changed everything for both of them. The dog had given her something she hadn't realized she needed: hope. And in return, she had found something even greater. People had seen her. They had helped her, not because she was a charity case, but because they recognized her humanity. That simple exchange, that small gesture, had sparked a chain reaction, reminding her that kindness could make a difference, no matter how small. As Emily sat there, watching the world around her, she realized how much had changed. She wasn't just the girl who had nothing. She was someone with a future, someone who had found her way back to the light. The kindness she had received was now something she wanted to give back to others who were still struggling, still invisible. She knew she couldn't change everything, but she could make a difference, just as others had done for her. The dog nudged her hand, and she smiled, scratching behind its ears. They had both come so far together, and there was still so much more to experience. Emily's journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living, about finding joy in the simple moments and sharing that joy with others. It was about hope, love, and the undeniable power of kindness. And as the sun set on that peaceful afternoon, Emily knew that no matter what the future held, she had found something that would carry her through, something that no one could ever take away, the belief that a single act of kindness could change everything. Emily stood in front of a small group of people gathered at the community center, her heart racing. She hadn't planned on speaking today, but something had shifted in her over the past few months, something that made her want to share her story, to give back in any way she could. The dog sat by her feet, its tail wagging, as if it too knew how important this moment was. As she looked out at the faces in front of her, she could see a mix of curiosity, concern, and hope. These were people who were struggling in their own ways, who had been where she had once been. People who were still fighting, still searching for that spark of kindness that could change everything. Taking a deep breath, Emily spoke softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. I know what it feels like to feel invisible, to feel like you have nothing left to give. I've been there. I've sat on the cold streets, watched the world move on without me, and wondered if anyone would ever notice. She paused for a moment, glancing down at the dog, her companion through it all. But then, one day, something changed. Someone saw me. They didn't look away. They didn't judge me. They just gave me a little bit of kindness, and that made all the difference. Her voice wavered slightly as she continued. I didn't have much to give in return, but that small act of kindness sparked something inside me. It made me believe again. It made me believe that there was hope, that I wasn't alone. And now I want to be that person for someone else. I want to remind you that no matter how dark it gets, there is always someone out there who sees you, who cares. And you are never truly alone. As she spoke, the room fell silent. The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, connecting her to each person in the room. She wasn't just telling them her story, she was sharing a piece of herself, a piece of the hope and strength that had carried her through the hardest times. After a few moments, Emily took a deep breath and smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up her face. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter where you are in life, no matter how hard it gets, kindness has the power to change everything. It's the one thing we can all give, and it's the one thing that can heal us all. As she finished speaking, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Pride in herself, in the journey she had taken, and in the fact that she could now offer something to others. The room erupted in applause, and Emily felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that her story had touched others, just as the kindness of strangers had once touched her. It was a new beginning for Emily, a beginning that wasn't defined by where she had come from, but by where she was going. She was no longer the girl sitting on the sidewalk with nothing left to give. She was someone with a story, a purpose, and the strength to help others find their way. And with each passing day, she would continue to spread that light, one act of kindness at a time.